The courtroom smelled like floor wax and old ambition. The kind of place where the powerful felt at home and everyone else felt watched. Allison Slaw had been in rooms like this before. Not as a visitor, not as a spectator. But today, she sat quietly in the third row, her hands folded over a leather portfolio, her expression unreadable. She wore a charcoal blazer. Her hair was pulled back. She looked like someone's lawyer. She looked like someone who knew exactly where every camera in the room was pointed. She knew because she had counted them. Officer Paul Wiggins hadn't noticed her when he walked in. That was his first mistake. Wiggins was the kind of man who wore authority the way some men wear cologne. Too much, in all the wrong places. 15 years on the force. 3 complaints filed. 0 consequences. He had the walk of a man who had never once been told no by anyone who mattered. He stood near the back doors of Courtroom 7B with his thumbs hooked into his belt, scanning the room the way a landlord surveys property he believes he owns. His eyes landed on Allison. She didn't look away. That bothered him more than he would ever admit. Earlier that morning, in the parking garage beneath the building, Wiggins had tried to wave her out of a reserved space near the elevator. She had shown him her credentials. He had looked at the card, looked at her, and said, loudly enough for 2 clerks to hear, "Asterisk, those spaces aren't for you today, sweetheart." Asterisk. Allison had parked anyway. Now, inside the courtroom, she rose from her seat to approach the clerk's desk. A simple thing. A routine thing. She was delivering pretrial documentation for a 10 a.m. hearing. "Sit down." Wiggins moved to block her path. "I have documents to submit, officer. Please step aside." I said sit down. The room didn't go quiet all at once. It went quiet piece by piece, a whispered conversation stopping here, a phone being lowered there, a court reporter's fingers hovering above the keys. "This is a public proceeding," Allison said, her voice level, almost clinical. "You have no legal basis to obstruct me. I'd advise you to think carefully about your next move." Wiggins didn't think carefully. He never did. He grabbed her wrist, and when she pivoted, calmly, instinctively, the way a woman learns to pivot when men grab, he called it resistance. The slap came fast, open palm, loud enough that 3 people flinched simultaneously. The red mark bloomed on Allison Slaw's cheek like a sentence being written. She didn't cry out. She didn't reach for her face. She turned slowly and looked at Paul Wiggins with the calm, measuring eyes of a woman who had been waiting, patiently, professionally, deliberately, for exactly this moment. Asterisk. You just made a very serious mistake, officer. Asterisk. She wasn't wrong. Cook County Courthouse had a reputation. Not the kind carved in a marble above the entrance, justice for all, but the kind whispered in the parking garage, traded in the hallways, passed between public defenders and bail bondsmen over bad coffee. The kind of reputation that lived in the gaps between what the law said and what actually happened inside these walls. For 15 years, Paul Wiggins had been one of those gaps. He hadn't started that way. Nobody does. Fresh out of the academy, he had been the kind of officer people pointed at as proof the system worked. Punctual, decorated, smiled in the department photos. His mother kept a framed copy on her mantle in Bridgeport. But somewhere between his 3rd year and his 4th, Paul Wiggins discovered something that changes certain kinds of men permanently. He discovered that the badge worked differently depending on who was watching. In front of a supervisor, professional. In front of a camera, careful. In front of a black woman standing quietly in a parking space she had every right to occupy. Something else entirely. His partner for the last 4 years, Officer Dennis Kral, had learned to read the shift. The way Wiggins's jaw tightened. The way his voice dropped half an octave. Kral was younger, still carrying enough idealism to feel uncomfortable, not yet enough backbone to act on it. He had filed nothing, said nothing, told himself that wasn't the same as doing nothing. It was. The courthouse security detail ran on informal hierarchy that had nothing to do with rank. Wiggins sat at the top of it. Not because anyone had appointed him, but because he had cultivated favor the way certain people cultivate debt in others. Small things. Letting the right people park in the wrong spaces. Looking away at the right moments. Making the wrong people feel unwelcome until they stop coming back. 3 complaints have been filed against him in 5 years. One by a paralegal who said he had cornered her in a stairwell after she photographed him berating a defendant's family member in the hall. One by a translator who said he had referred to her in terms that required 3 asterisks to print. One by a man whose case had been mysteriously misfiled after he refused to pay for a parking spot Wiggins had decided was his to sell. All 3 complaints have been reviewed. All 3 have been closed. The man who reviewed them, Chief of Courthouse Security Raymond Holt, played poker with Wiggins every second Thursday. This was the world Allison Slaw had walked into that Tuesday morning. Not blind to it, not naive about it. She had read every complaint. She had reviewed every closed file. She had studied Raymond Holt's financial disclosures with the focused attention of someone who already knew what they were going to find. She had been building this case for 8 months. Paul Wiggins had been walking into it all morning. The clock on the courtroom wall read 9:47 a.m. 13 minutes before the 10 a.m. hearing was scheduled to begin, and courtroom 7B was already restless. The docket was heavy. The air conditioning was losing its argument with the Chicago humidity. Judge Carol Pemberton, the presiding judge for the morning session, had not yet emerged from chambers. Her absence gave the tension room to breathe and grow. Allison rose from the 3rd row with the quiet confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She had documents to submit to the clerk's desk. Pretrial filings for the 10 a.m. hearing. Routine. Procedural. 11 steps from where she was sitting. She never made it to step 4. I told you to sit down. Wiggins stepped directly into her path, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. His voice carried the particular edge of a man who had never developed the ability to distinguish between authority and aggression. I am submitting court documents, officer. Allison's voice was a flat calm. This is my legal right and my professional obligation. Please move. Behind Wiggins, Kroll shifted his weight. His eyes moved to the gallery. 12 people watching. A court reporter with her fingers frozen above the keys. 2 defense attorneys who had stopped pretending to review their notes. You don't have rights in my courtroom, Wiggins said. This isn't your courtroom. Allison looked at him the way a surgeon looks at a scan, not with emotion, but with assessment. And I'd encourage you to lower your voice before you make this significantly worse for yourself. The word yourself landed somewhere tender. Wiggins reached for her wrist. The grab was hard enough to leave marks. The kind of grip that wasn't about restraint, it was about a message. He twisted her arm behind her back and said the word arrest the way men like him say it. Not as a legal procedure, but as a punishment. Allison pivoted to keep her balance. Her portfolio hit the floor. Papers scattered across the carpet in a slow, silent fan. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. Wiggins swung his open palm and connected with the left side of Allison Slaw's face with a crack that bounced off every wall in courtroom 7B simultaneously. The sound was obscene in the silence. 3 people gasped. One woman in the gallery pressed her hand to her own cheek instinctively. Kroll took 2 full steps backward as if the distance might separate him from what had just happened. It couldn't. Allison's head snapped to the side. The mark appeared almost immediately. Vivid, undeniable, the color of consequence. She stood perfectly still for 3 full seconds. Then she turned back to face Paul Wiggins with an expression that didn't contain a single molecule of fear, only recognition. She had him exactly where she needed him. The side door swung open. Not the main entrance. Not the public doors through which lawyers and defendants and nervous family members filed every morning. The side door, the one that connected directly to the judge's private corridor. The one that only opened from the inside. Nobody had called asterisk all rise. Asterisk. Nobody had time. Allison Slaw didn't run for the exit. She didn't reach for her phone. She didn't do any of the things Paul Wiggins had silently counted on her doing. The things that would have made her look unstable, emotional, difficult. The things that would have made his version of events easier to sell. Instead, she moved toward the bench. "Hey," Wiggins lunged. His boot caught the edge of her scattered portfolio, and he stumbled, one hand grabbing at air while 12 people watched. Allison was already past the bar. She didn't stop at the clerk's desk. She climbed the 3 steps to the elevated platform with the measured precision of a woman who had climbed them before, who had, in fact, spent the last 6 weeks mentally rehearsing this exact moment, because she had known, with the cold certainty of someone who had read every file and reviewed every camera angle, that a man like Paul Wiggins would eventually give her exactly this opening. She had simply needed to be present when he did. The high-backed leather chair received her like it had been waiting. From the gallery, the transformation was instantaneous and total. One moment, she was a woman with a red mark on her cheek and papers on the floor. The next, she was reaching into the bench drawer, the drawer she knew the contents of because she had personally reviewed the chamber inventory 3 weeks prior, and pulling out a black judicial robe. She threw it over her shoulders in a single, continuous motion. The room stopped breathing. Wiggins had found his feet. His hand had moved to his belt. "Get down from there. That is a restricted area. I will use force." The gavel came down once. Crack. The sound was a period at the end of a very long sentence. "Officer Wiggins." Her voice hit the bench microphone and filled every corner of Courtroom 7B with the weight of institutional authority. "Remove your hand from your weapon. You are currently one decision away from a charge of threatening a sitting Superior Court judge. I would choose very carefully." The silence that followed was the kind that has mass. Wiggins's hand froze. The color in his face completed a slow, terrible journey from red to white. He started. My name," Allison Slaw said, leaning forward into the light, "is Justice Allison Slaw, newly appointed administrative judge for this district." She let that settle like concrete hardening. "And you just assaulted me in my own courtroom." The gavel came down again. Asterisk bailiff. "Secure him." Asterisk. The 2 senior bailiffs, Officers Tate and Morrison, both 20-year veterans of this building, moved toward Paul Wiggins with the grim, unhurried efficiency of men who had been waiting for this particular moment longer than they would publicly admit. Wiggins looked at them like they were strangers. They weren't. He had eaten lunch with Tate 17 times. He had borrowed Morrison's phone charger just last Tuesday. But the men walking toward him now weren't doing it as colleagues. They were doing it as officers of the court. And in Courtroom 7B, under the gaze of a sitting judge, that distinction meant everything. "Derek," Wiggins started, using Tate's first name deliberately, reaching for familiarity like a life raft. "Your belt, Paul," Tate said quietly. "Don't make this worse." Wiggins's jaw tightened. His eyes swept the room. The gallery, the lawyers, the court reporter whose fingers were moving again now, capturing every word in real time. He saw no allies. He saw 12 people watching a man discover the precise moment his world changed direction. He began unbuckling his duty belt. From the bench, Allison watched without expression. The mark on her cheek had deepened to a vivid crimson. She had not touched it once. She would not touch it. Not in this room, not while he could see her. It was evidence. It was testimony. It was the most articulate thing in the building. "This court," she said, her voice carrying the measured cadence of someone who had been trained to make large rooms listen, "is equipped with 6 high-definition recording cameras operating continuously. Every second of what occurred in this room this morning has been captured in full. Officer Wiggins," she allowed his name to arrive without title, without rank, without the professional courtesy his badge had always demanded. "You are hereby suspended from all peace officer duties pending an emergency termination hearing." Wiggins's head snapped up. "You can't. You're the victim. That's a conflict of, I'm not conducting your criminal trial. Allison said calmly. I am administering this building. Those are separate jurisdictions, and you know it. She turned to the clerk. Contact the sheriff's department directly, not the precinct. I want internal affairs and the state's attorney's office here within the hour. Tell them to bring documentation. She turned back to Wiggins. You told me this wasn't my courtroom, Officer Wiggins. She let the silence sit for exactly 3 seconds. I'd like you to look around and reconsider that position. Nobody laughed. Nobody needed to, as Tate and Morrison led a beltless, diminished Paul Wiggins toward the side holding room. The gallery watched in complete silence. Lawyers who had joked with him in hallways. Defendants who had feared him in corridors. All of them watching the same man, seeing him clearly, many of them for the very first time. Allison picked up her gavel. The case of the state versus Henderson. Is counsel prepared to proceed? The defense attorney stood on unsteady legs. Yes, Your Honor. Then let's begin, Allison said. This court has a great deal of work to do. By noon, the news vans had claimed every available space in the courthouse parking lot. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted from shock to something heavier. The kind of institutional dread that settles into a building when people begin calculating quietly, privately at their desks and in their stairwells exactly how much they knew and exactly how much of what they knew could be traced back to them. Allison felt at the moment she stepped into the conference room behind Courtroom 7B. District Attorney Sandra Okafor was already there. She was a composed woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for prosecuting cases that made powerful people uncomfortable. But today she looked like someone who had opened a door expecting one room and found an entire building behind it. The video is indefensible, Okafor said, sliding a tablet across the table. Wiggins is finished, but his union is already moving. They're going to argue provocation. They're going to dig into your record, your appointment, your family, everything. Let them dig, Allison said, sitting down. They won't find what they're looking for. There's something else. Okafor lowered her voice. We did a preliminary sweep of Wiggins's personnel file. The complaint history is worse than the official record shows. 2 years ago, a court clerk named Brenda Osei filed a harassment report. Said Wiggins threatened her after she witnessed him accepting cash from a defense contractor in the basement. The complaint was received, logged, she paused, and then quietly buried by the chief of courthouse security. Allison's eyes narrowed. Raymond Holt. His signature is on the closure form. The name settled between them like something with weight. Before Allison could respond, the door opened. Officer Dennis Krull stepped in. He looked like a man who hadn't slept since the slap, which, given that it had occurred 3 hours ago, said something significant about his conscience. Your Honor. He sat without being invited. His hands were gripped together so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. I need to make a statement. Not as an officer. As a witness. Allison looked at him steadily. Then speak carefully, Officer Krull. Wiggins has a notebook. Krull's voice dropped to just above a whisper. He keeps it in his locker. He calls it his retirement plan. I've seen it twice. It's a record, payments, names, dates. Every favor he's done for people in this building over the last 7 years. Every piece of evidence that got lost. Every witness that got persuaded to forget something. He swallowed. He told me if anything ever went wrong, I should get it and destroy it. The room went absolutely still. Okafor set her pen down slowly. Allison leaned forward. Where is it now? Still in his locker, Krull said. He thinks I'm still on his side. Allison held his gaze for a long, measuring moment. Officer Krull, she said quietly, you have exactly one opportunity to be on the right side of this. I suggest you decide quickly which version of your career you'd like to have. Krull nodded. His chair scraped back. I'll get the notebook. The basement locker room smelled like industrial cleaner and old secrets. Krull moved fast. Locker 412. The combination Wiggins had whispered to him 18 months ago during a shift they'd worked together. back when Wiggins still trusted him completely, back before Crawl had started keeping his own private record of things he'd witnessed and couldn't unfeel. The notebook was exactly where Wiggins said it would be, tucked behind a false panel Wiggins had installed himself. Small, black, moleskin cover worn soft at the corners from handling. Crawl reached for it. Step away from that locker, Dennis. He spun around. Sergeant Raymond Holt stood in the doorway. Not in uniform. He was supposed to be off duty. But he was here, which meant someone had called him, which meant Wiggins still had lines of communication running even from the holding room. Holt was a large man with the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades making problems disappear quietly. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, which was somehow worse. "Give me the book," Holt said. "You don't know what's in there. Names that will burn this entire building to the ground, including people who don't deserve it." He slapped a judge, Raymond. Crawl's voice was steadier than he felt. "In open court, in front of 12 witnesses and 6 cameras. And he'll answer for that." Holt took a step closer. "But that book goes beyond Wiggins. You hand that to Sterling and careers end. Families get destroyed. People who made one bad decision 8 years ago lose everything. And the people Wiggins destroyed?" Crawl asked. "What do they get?" Holt had no answer for that. The door swung open behind him. Allison walked in flanked by 2 state marshals, still in her charcoal suit, the mark on her cheek a darkening testament to everything that had brought them all to this basement. She looked at Holt with the calm assessment of someone who had already read his financial disclosures, reviewed his personnel decisions, and traced his signature on 3 separate complaint closure forms. She held out her hand to Crawl. He placed the notebook in it without hesitation. She opened it. The first pages confirmed what she already suspected: payments, names, buried evidence, intimidated witnesses. 7 years of systemic corruption documented in Wiggins's cramped, careful handwriting. Methodical. Proud, almost. Then she turned to the last section. Her breath caught. At the bottom of the final page, under a heading that read insurance, Level 2, was a name she recognized with every part of herself that existed before she became a judge. Her father's name, Judge Clarence Slaw, retired, celebrated, the man whose framed photograph hung in the lobby of this very building, the man who had taught her that the law was the only instrument precise enough to deliver actual justice. Monthly payments, 7 entries, his personal account number written in Wiggins's handwriting like a wound that had been waiting patiently to open. Allison closed the notebook. She stood in the dim basement light for exactly 4 seconds, long enough to feel the full weight of what she was holding, long enough to understand that the path forward would cost her something she could never recover. Then she looked up at Okafor, who had followed her in and was watching her with careful, compassionate eyes. "Call the special prosecutor," Allison said. Her voice didn't shake. "All of it goes in." The plaza outside Cook County Courthouse looked like a city holding its breath. Protesters lined the steps 3 deep, their signs catching the late morning sun. News helicopters carved slow circles overhead. Inside, every seat in Courtroom 7B was occupied 30 minutes before the session began. The old guard sat in the front rows. Administrators, precinct commanders, men whose names appeared in the notebook and who had spent the last 18 hours consulting lawyers and rehearsing explanations. They had all made the same miscalculation. They thought Allison Slaw would blink. At exactly 10 a.m., Bailiff Morrison's voice filled the room. "All rise. The Superior Court of Cook County is now in session." The Honorable Justice Allison Slaw presiding. She walked to the bench wearing a new robe. Not the one from the drawer, a different one, ordered 3 weeks ago, delivered yesterday. Matte black. No ornamentation. The mark on her cheek had faded to a yellowish bruise that the courtroom cameras would capture in unforgiving detail. She didn't acknowledge it. It was already in evidence. Paul Wiggins sat at the defense table in a navy suit, his attorney, Marcus Webb, a man whose reputation was built on finding procedural exits, whispering with practiced confidence into his ear. Wiggins still carried the residue of his old authority like a habit he hadn't yet broken. His back was straight. His expression was controlled. That lasted approximately 4 minutes. Before we hear arguments, Allison said, "This court has administrative matters to address." She held up the notebook in its evidence bag. This ledger was recovered from the defendant's locker by a cooperating witness. It documents a criminal enterprise operating within this courthouse for 7 years. Payments, suppressed evidence, intimidated witnesses, and manufactured testimony across no fewer than 39 cases. The murmur that moved through the gallery was low and continuous, like water finding cracks. Webb was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, given your personal involvement as the alleged victim, the defense moves for immediate recusal." Motion denied. Allison's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. This court is acting in its administrative capacity. Your motion is noted and overruled. Webb opened his mouth. "Sit down, Mr. Webb." 3 words. Absolute zero. He sat. Furthermore, Allison continued, lifting a second document. Among the entries in this ledger is a record of payments made to Mr. Marcus Webb himself, specifically as an intermediary in the suppression of witness testimony during the West Side fraud trials of 2019. She slid the document to the clerk. "Bailiff Morrison, take Mr. Webb into custody." The room detonated. Webb lunged for the exit. Morrison was faster. The sound of handcuffs connecting echoed through the chamber like punctuation. Wiggins watched his lawyer being removed in real time. The last traces of composure left his face in a single, visible moment, like a structure losing its load-bearing wall. He stood up. His voice cracked open with raw, cornered rage. "You think you're better than me? You think that robe makes you clean? I kept this courthouse running for 15 years. Officer Krull." Allison's eyes moved to the back of the room where Krull stood in plain clothes, state's evidence paperwork already filed. "Would you like to respond to that?" Krull stepped forward. "He ran it into the ground, Your Honor. Some of us just took too long to say so." Wiggins lunged across the table. He didn't get close. Bail was denied. Federal marshals stepped forward. As the chains connected around Paul Wiggins's wrists, Allison Slaw picked up her gavel with the unhurried certainty of a woman who had planned for every version of this moment. "This court," she said, "is in recess." Crack. The sound landed like a door, closing on everything that came before it. 6 months later, Courtroom 7B felt like a different building. The heavy shadows that had lived in its corners for years, the unspoken agreements, the traded favors, the quiet menace of men who believed the institution existed to protect them, had been systematically removed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but with the patient, methodical precision of a woman who understood that lasting change required documentation, not just declaration. Today, the room held one final piece of unfinished business. Paul Wiggins arrived for sentencing in a gray county jumpsuit that hung off his frame like an apology. 6 months of pre-trial detention had taken the architecture out of him. The squared shoulders, the deliberate walk, the practiced expression of a man who expected deference from every room he entered. What remained was smaller, hollower, a man-shaped space where certainty used to live. He sat at the defense table alone. Marcus Webb was awaiting his own trial. 3 other attorneys had declined the case after reviewing the evidence. The public defender assigned to him was a young woman named Claire Sung who had reviewed the notebook, reviewed the camera footage, reviewed 39 cases worth of manufactured testimony, and had privately advised her client that the most productive use of their remaining time together was deciding how he wanted to be remembered. He hadn't taken that advice well. The gallery was full. Brenda Osei sat in the second row, the clerk whose harassment complaint had been buried by Raymond Holt 3 years ago. Beside her sat 4 individuals whose wrongful convictions, secured with Wiggins's fabricated testimony, had been overturned in the preceding months. They had walked out of Stateville Correctional on a Tuesday morning, blinking into daylight they had been told they wouldn't see for decades. They were here to watch the door close behind the man who had put them there. All rise. Allison entered without ceremony. She had stopped needing ceremony months ago. Please be seated. She opened the sentencing file. She did not look at Wiggins immediately. She read, carefully, completely, the way she read everything, as though the document deserved the full weight of her attention before she acted on it. Then she looked up. Mr. Wiggins, do you have anything you wish to say before I pronounce judgment? Wiggins stood slowly. His legs visibly trembled. For a long moment, he said nothing, and in that nothing, something complicated moved across his face. Not remorse exactly. More like a man finally understanding the complete dimensions of the hole he had spent 15 years digging. I did what I thought was necessary, he said finally. His voice was barely above a whisper. I kept order. You kept control, Allison replied. Those are not the same thing. She lifted the sentencing document. For felony assault of a judicial officer, 8 years. For racketeering and criminal conspiracy, 18 years consecutive. For perjury resulting in a wrongful imprisonment of 4 citizens, 12 years consecutive. She set the document down. A total of 38 years in the state penitentiary. No possibility of parole for the first 28. The gavel came down. Crack. Wiggins didn't scream. He didn't fight. He folded back into his chair like something structural had finally given way. Like a man discovering, at the absolute end, that the world he had spent 15 years building had been constructed entirely on the assumption that no one would ever hold him accountable. Someone had. As the marshals moved in with ankle shackles, Wiggins turned and looked at Allison one final time. She met his gaze with the same steady, clinical expression she had worn when his palm had connected with her cheek 6 months ago in this very room. The same room. Completely different world. The chains clicked shut. 3 weeks after the sentencing, a small bronze plaque was installed near the entrance of the courthouse parking garage. It wasn't commissioned by the city. It wasn't ordered by the court administration. It was funded quietly, collectively, by 41 courthouse employees, clerks, translators, bailiffs, paralegals, people who had spent years navigating the building's invisible architecture of fear and had decided, together, that the new version of this place deserved a permanent marker. The inscription read, Asterisk, in this building, the law belongs to everyone. No badge is a shield against it. No robe is above it. Truth is the only authority that matters here. Asterisk. Allison stood beside it on a Tuesday morning, watching the workers apply the final polish. She was in her regular charcoal blazer. No robe. No ceremony. She had a 9 a.m. hearing in 20 minutes and 3 pending case reviews waiting on her desk. She had work to do. There was always work to do. Behind her, Officer Dennis Krull approached. He was in plain clothes. His transfer to the city's newly established courthouse integrity unit had been processed the previous week. He looked like a man who had exchanged something heavy for something lighter and was still adjusting to the difference in weight. The last of the West Side fraud cases got cleared this morning, he said. All 4 convictions formally vacated. Allison nodded. She had already seen the filing. They're asking to meet you, Krull said. The 4 men. They want to say thank you. Allison was quiet for a moment. A taxi moved through the garage below. Somewhere in the building behind her, a new day of hearings was assembling itself. Defendants and lawyers and families and evidence and the slow, imperfect machinery of justice grinding forward. Tell them I'll meet them, she said, and tell them the apology runs the other direction. The system failed them long before Paul Wiggins did. All I did was stop it failing them twice. Krull started to respond. She was already walking back toward the entrance. Paul Wiggins arrived at Danville Correctional Center on a Wednesday. The intake process was designed to reduce every man to his essential components: name, number, cell assignment. His was 44B. The mattress was thin. The window was narrow. The walls carried the names of men who had preceded him. In the cell directly beside his, a voice drifted through the shared wall. Quiet, patient, familiar in the specific way that nightmares are familiar. It was a man named Jerome Washington, one of the four whose conviction Wiggins had manufactured with fabricated evidence in 2017. Jerome had been transferred to Danville 3 days before Wiggins arrived. He had heard Wiggins was coming. "I've been waiting a long time for this conversation, Paul," Jerome said softly. "We've got plenty of time now. No vai. No te voc. No Raymond Holt to make the paperwork disappear." A pause. "Just you and what you actually are." Wiggins pressed his back against the wall. The moon was a thin sliver through the narrow window. Outside, Chicago continued its business, indifferent, enormous, moving forward. Inside cell 44B, Paul Wiggins began to understand the true geometry of the world he had built for himself. Every wall, every corner, every consequence, all of it his own construction. Justice isn't always clean. It isn't always fast. And it almost never arrives without cost. Ask Allison Slaw, who paid for it with her father's reputation, her cheek, and 8 months of her life building a case in silence. But arrived. If you believe that no badge is a shield against the truth, and no gavel is too heavy for a hand that seeks the right path, hit that like button right now. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that accountability is not a myth. It is patient, it is precise, and it finds its way home. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Allison's position? Would you have exposed your own father to protect your oath? We want to know. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because in this channel, justice always gets the last word.